One man disappeared in 1997. The only clue, a recording of him saying, "It's inside the mirror." Paranormal M investigates the impossible. Subscribe and hear his last words. The Demon's Disguise. Long ago, in a quiet riverside village, there lived two brothers. Every morning without fail, they set out together with their nets and their little wooden boat, eager to bring home fish for the family. One morning, however, the older brother began to notice something peculiar. He hauled up a net after, seeing this thing teeming with fish, and he just passed him to his younger brother to keep in the boat. Yet whenever he looked back, the catch had mysteriously dwindled. Finally, not a single fish remained, and, puzzled, the elder brother turned to his sibling and demanded, "I've caught so many fish today. Where are they going?" But the younger brother, he only blinked innocently and said, "When did you catch so many fish? I haven't seen them at all." The elder brother's heart sank. His eyes shifted and caught sight of a strange object near his brother's feet. A jalunga, a small enchanted pouch. And in that instant, the truth dawned on him. This was not brother. It was a dot, a shape-shifting water demon of Assamese lore. The real younger brother must have already been taken. Assamese. Keeping his fear hidden, the elder quietly slipped a jalunga into his hands and concealed it. Without raising suspicion, he rode home, and there he buried the pouch deep inside the family's great bin of mustard seeds. Safe, for no dot can endure even the touch of mustard. That evening, the demon followed him home, still disguised as the younger brother. The elder whispered to his mother, "If he ever asks for the jalunga, never give it back, promise me." He told her no more, not even his younger brother's new bride. That's right. So years went by. Both brothers married and had children. But the creature never ceased to ask, "Ma, where is my jalunga?" And every time, mother would answer with practiced indifference, "It's in the mustard bin. Go take it if you want." One fateful night, when the whole household had gone to watch Boana, the grand village play, only the wary old mother remained at home. The demon came once more, and his voice urgent, "Ma, where is my jalunga?" Tired of landless questions, she lost her patience. She dug into that mustard bin. She pulled out the pouch, flung it outside. "There, take it. Stop asking." The dot seized it with glee. He turned to her and said, "Ma, I'm leaving now." And then he made a strange hollow sound with his mouth, like a... Then he vanished into the night. When the elder brother returned and learned what had happened, he wept bitterly. "Ma, our true son is lost forever. He'll never come back." And only then did he reveal the truth to his grieving family. But the tale did not end there. It is whispered long after the demon fled, the family's doorstep would sometimes be found covered with enormous fish. Offerings, perhaps. Offerings from the vanished dot to his human wife and children. And those children, they grew unlike any other in the village, taller and stronger and stranger, with features that weren't wholly human. For the dot, as the elders say, it's a creature of terrible power. It lives by its jalunga, and if that pouch is taken, it becomes trapped in a sort of human form. Yet, even bound, the creature's blood leaves marks that ripple across generations. And so, by the riverbanks of Assam, some still murmur, that the descendants of demons walk quietly among us. Assam, Assamese. I'm with it. The Phantom Train of Pinkton Tunnel. I've told this tale to at least a few friends before, and every time they stare at me like I'm making it up. But it happened, and it still makes the hair on my arm stand up. 15 years ago, my husband and I joined a ghost tour in Picton, New South Wales. It had poured rain earlier, as you might expect. So most people stayed home. Only a handful of us turned up, like 10 adults and, strangely, a young girl around 12. She was tagging along with her parents. At first, the tour was textbook stuff. A few creepy old buildings supposedly haunted. A cemetery with graves of convicts. Creepy, sure. Terrifying, not really. But then came the Mushroom Tunnel, built in the 1800s as a railway tunnel. Later on, it was used to grow mushrooms. By the time we visited, it had long been abandoned, and according to our guide, a young woman had died tragically inside. We weren't allowed in. It was deemed as being unsafe. So we just stood at that entrance around 11:30 at night. We were staring into pure blackness. But the thing is I swear, I saw this outline of a woman deeper in the tunnel. My eyes kept playing tricks on me. That's when the air turned icy. Everybody pulled their jackets tighter, and then, faint at first, came the unmistakable sound of an old train. The chugging wheels, the grinding metal. A dim light flickered in the tunnel and grew brighter. The sound thundered closer, as if a full locomotive was barreling straight for us. And just before it should have crushed us, the girl flicked on her torch. The tunnel was empty, silent. A rush of wind blasted past, as though something had just flown by at speed. We were shaken, trying to just convince ourselves it was some sort of a trick. But as we turned to leave, a couple behind us snapped a photo with their little digital camera. Moments later, they ran forward, wide-eyed. They were showing us the screen, and in the shot, clear as day, there was a torso of a man in a crimson coat, half faded as though stepping out of another world. Only after we told the guide what we had seen did she admit a violent male spirit was said to haunt the tunnel. She never mentions him on tours, too dangerous, she said. Later at home, my husband and I tried to explain the train light logically. Car headlights, maybe, behind the tunnel was nothing but farmland. We returned months later for another tour, hoping for answers, but that time, nothing but silence. And that's the worst part, because it meant the first night was real. The visitor who wasn't my brother. So picture this. I'm 12 years old. I'm sitting cross-legged on my bed. I'm probably reading some cringy teen magazine. That's my older brother, who we're going to call Ethan here. They were 16 at the time, and they popped into my room. He leaned on the door frame and asked me something random. I don't remember what exactly, but it was the kind of small talk you forget 5 minutes later. You know the kind. Before leaving, I clearly remember saying, "Thanks, Ethan." He gave me a half smile and walked off. Totally normal interaction. Fast forward, maybe 15 minutes, and my parents came home from a late dinner and called out, "Ethan, we're back." There's silence. My mom frowned and turned to me. "Is your brother home?" I said, "Yeah, he was just in my room." We both shouted his name. We searched the house. We checked the basement, even the garage. There was nothing. He was nowhere. Mom pulled out her phone and called him. He picked up right away, laughing with background noise behind him. "I'm at Marcus's place," he said. "Been here for a couple hours. Why?" Cue my heart dropping straight into my ass. Because 15 minutes ago, I'd been chatting with him in my room, and later that night when Ethan actually did come home, I told him what happened for us, and he looked at me like I was nuts. "I've been at Marcus's the whole night, swear on my life." Ethan really isn't the prank type. He always had been, the kind of brother who helps me with homework, not the kind who masterminds a 2-hour ghost-level practical joke. Needless to say, I slept with the lights on for a few weeks. Now it's one of those weird family legends that comes up on holidays. The night not Ethan came to visit. Paranormal folks talk about mimic spirits, things that copy the people you know. I don't know what I saw, but I do know it wasn't my brother. The Watcher on the Rooftop. I've seen something unsettling more than once on the rooftop of my family's apartment. It's back in my home country, which is definitely not the United States. I'm writing this because I never found an explanation, and maybe, just maybe, someone else has encountered the same thing. Our apartment is on the 5th floor. It's on a block surrounded by other buildings of similar heights. And in my country, rooftops are flat and open. People use them for all sorts of normal things. Drying laundry and keeping water tanks, or just cooling off in the evening. It's not some abandoned or forbidden place. It's part of daily life. The strange events always happen deep into the night after midnight, and the streets were empty and the sky was cloudless. No fog, no rain, no snow. We don't even get snow where I live. I miss snow. But each time, a sudden brilliant light appeared shockingly close to me, just a few meters away. It wasn't faint, it wasn't a wide glow. It was focused and sharp like a car headlight or spotlight moving with intent. One night I was pacing slowly while listening to music on my earphones. A strong beam lit up the wall ahead of me, as though someone behind me had just turned on a blinding torch. My stomach dropped. I spun around instantly, only to find the rooftop swallowed in darkness. No person, no sound, no drone. Just silence. Another time, the light didn't come from behind. It came straight down from above. It spread slightly, and it did this as it descended. And I swear it felt like it was aimed right at me, as though I had been chosen in that moment. On a different night, I saw the light cut across the sky in front of me, slow and deliberate. My younger brother was with me then, and he caught a glimpse too. He laughed it off. I couldn't shake it. And there's more. My cousin once told me she saw something similar on the rooftop. Light shining out of the elevator shaft and reflecting near the water tank. There's no lamp or bulb anywhere close to that spot. So where did it come from? I know what you're thinking. Tricks of the eye or reflections and maybe even phone screens, but no. This light was too bright and too controlled. And each time it carried a weight and a presence. I felt cold and I felt exposed, like I was being studied. Fear left behind stayed long after the light disappeared. And this happened more than 3 times now. Always silent, always sudden, always leaving nothing behind. Not a drone, not fireworks, not anything I can explain. So, has anybody ever experienced this? A strange, intelligent seeming light that comes close and lingers for a breath and vanishes into the night without a trace. Echoes in the loop. In the loop. Well, I used to dream. It wasn't just random nonsense. They would come true. Not in a deja vu way, but in sharp, detailed slices of reality. People I hadn't met. Words I hadn't spoken. Rooms I hadn't walked into yet. Like I'd already seen the movie trailer of my life before it was released. It wasn't about grand events. I didn't dream about wars or presidents, just the mundane things. Quiet moments. Moments that should have meant nothing. I remember one from 7th grade. I dreamed I was standing in a hallway lined with lockers. I was chatting with a group of kids, and one boy laughed and said, "Run along like a frightened rabbit, will ya?" And I woke up thinking, oh, that's odd. Years later, in my sophomore year, the scene unfolded exactly. Same voices, same laughter, even the way the sunlight hit the lockers. I froze and my heart was going crazy because I knew what he was about to say before his lips even moved. And he had a weird voice. Another time, I dreamed of a woman I didn't know. She leaned in and whispered, "I haven't told anyone yet, but I'm moving to Arizona." I filed it away as another strange scrap of dream. Years later, I got a part-time job at Target, and that's where I met her. We became friends, close even. Texts every night, the kind of friendships that make you think it might turn into something more. One evening, sitting across from her in a diner, she sighed and said, I haven't told anyone." When I finished her sentence for her face drained of color. She demanded to know how I could possibly know. I told her the truth. She never spoke to me again. For years, I thought I was cursed, broken, and wrong. I don't dream much anymore, but those old fragments still stick to me like burrs. Not scary, just inescapable. Then I read about something called the eternal return. The theory that life doesn't march forward, but it loops. Not reincarnation as someone else, but the exact same life lived endlessly, over and over, no escape. Oh God, I hope not. Then suddenly, everything clicked. Too much, in fact. These weren't premonitions, they were memories left over from last time I lived the same script. And now it eats at me. How many times have I laughed the same laugh? How many times have I sat here asking myself these exact questions? I feel trapped in a play I never auditioned for, repeating lines I've spoken 1,000 times. And the worst part is I'm terrified that next time I'll forget again, and I'll mistake it all for something new. The house that wouldn't sleep. I moved into this house in late autumn 2023. And from the beginning, the energy felt unsettled. Not unbearable, just quietly wrong. I've always been sensitive to that sort of thing, though it terrifies me. Even as a child, I hated nighttime. I would sneak into my sister's room or my parents' room too scared to be alone, and I wouldn't walk around the house in the dark. One of my earliest memories is standing in my crib. I'm sobbing because shadows were sliding along the wall. I don't know how old I was, but the memory is sharp. For years, if I wasn't with somebody, I'd stay awake until exhaustion forced me under. Fast forward to this house. The place has always been unnerving, but my kids didn't notice at first. And that changed when my oldest saw her bedroom door opening by itself. Some nights she'd shut it tight, only to wake up and find it wide open. We all heard the stairs creak sometimes, but we would brush it off, and things escalated eventually. One night I dozed off on the couch with my 3-year-old, and she stirred and cried and fell back asleep in my arms. That's when I noticed a little boy, just standing at the bottom of the staircase watching. I didn't realize until the next morning how wrong that moment was. And since then, my bedroom feels suffocatingly dark. I sleep on the couch more often than in my own bed, and I've always hated mirrors. But now my vanity feels hostile, like something lingers there, waiting for me to look at it. When the kids are away with their dad, the house is unbearable. The steps creak every single night as though somebody walks down them, and I can feel it pause at the bottom. Sometimes it shifts, waiting in the hallway toward the kitchen. And if I do fall asleep, I wake up like clockwork, 2:43 a.m., heart racing, and I can't rest until dawn. During those hours, the sounds don't stop. And it touched me once. I was under a blanket with a body pillow pressed to me. I felt a hand settle on my leg, except it wasn't a hand. It was like cool air shaped into a hand. Another time, while painting with an audiobook playing, I heard 3 distinct steps creak, and then I felt it enter the room. My body burned with heat from fear. I couldn't move until it finally faded. I seemed to catch things in my peripheral vision constantly. Shadows and movements that vanished when I look. On vacation last month, I slept like a child, dreamless and calm, which makes me think this thing belongs to the house and maybe not me. A couple of months ago, I dreamed I was turning off the kitchen lights and locking the side door by the garage. One that always gave me chills. But in the dream, I pushed on the door to be short-latched. Suddenly, something on the other side began knocking, furious and desperate. And I woke up instantly. Last night was the worst. The stairs groaned again, so I turned up music to drown it out. In mid-song, I heard a violent crash from the bathroom. And this morning, I found bottles and bath toys scattered across the floor. Called my oldest to stay on the phone with me until I wasn't alone anymore. She drifted off, but I then heard whispering like my name and then mocking me. "Are you awake?" The noises went until about 6 a.m. Finally slept after sunrise. But even now, in broad daylight, the steps creak and my body flushes hot with terror. And sometimes I feel a cold breeze. I think maybe it means no harm, but when the heat floods my body, that's when I know it's here, and it wants me to know that. The door that wouldn't stay shut. So here's the setup. I'm a broke student, living in one of those shared apartments that should probably be condemned. But somehow, it still has tenants every semester. The place is ancient, like the kind of old where the paint peels just from being stared at for too long. The layout's sort of odd. You walk into this wide hall with 2 beds. They're shoved up against the wall. Then there's a dusty old wardrobe that no one uses. Then there's a sort of narrow passage. On one side, there's the kitchen plus my room, and we're going to call that room 1. And on the other side, 2 shared bathrooms, and straight ahead room 2, shared by 2 other students. Now room 2 is cursed with the dumbest door design ever. It has this flimsy wooden stopper wedged at the bottom, and if it drops, the door basically jams shut. You need either Herculean strength to kick it open from outside or somebody inside to pull it up. Which means the only practical way to live there is to keep it open whenever you leave. Here's the thing. Everybody moved out at the end of the lease except for me. And the cook, who sometimes comes in, only does when I'm around, so since I have to hand over the groceries myself. So for a while, it's just me rattling around in this dying building. And I'm paranoid, like triple check everything paranoid. Every time I leave for class, I do the ritual. Windows shut, both balcony doors locked and latched, bathrooms locked, and my room sealed. Even the stubborn old door of room 2, shoved closed. No shortcuts. Day 1, I come home late. Room 2's door is open, which shouldn't be possible. Well, chalk it up to me messing up. Day 2 and 3, same thing. Room 2 door open again, and on day 3, the hallway balcony door was also wide open. Even though I know I locked it. And at this point, my skin is crawling, and, well, day 4, Sunday. I stay home all day waiting, and nothing happens, and it's dead silence like the apartment knows I'm watching. Day 5, I come back from class, and now the bathroom door is left slightly ajar. That was it. I packed a bag, started crashing at a friend's place. Have not renewed the lease. Not planning to. And before you say gas leak or wind, nope, the apartment has no gas lines, only induction stoves. Those are the kinds with a little mark on it where you put the metal pot on it. It's well ventilated, and I check the doors 3 separate times before leaving always, and the worst part is that cursed room 2 door. I know how much force it takes to open it from outside, and there's no way it should be standing open like it's inviting me in. And yet, every time I returned, it was. The Runes of Hollow Reality. This dream shook me so badly that even now, months later, I keep wondering if I really woke up. It began innocently. I was at home and everything looked exactly the same as always. Too normal and too sharp to be a dream. My cat kept slipping outside no matter how many times I pulled him back in. The door opened on its own, as though something invisible was inviting him out. And even stranger, when I grabbed him, he scratched me, and he never scratches me. Then my dog followed, tail wagging, ready to join whatever unseen force was calling them. Before I could figure it out, the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to some group, or maybe a band, maybe a movement, I couldn't remember exactly. Only that they were sort of odd and unsettling. Calmly they asked, "Why didn't you follow the cat?" I snapped back, demanding to know how they knew my number, why they were meddling with my pets. The voice replied smoothly, as though reading my own thoughts. "We can sense your energy. You should have opened the file." They spoke of a book. Ragazza, they called it. I didn't believe it was the real name. Moments later, I found myself at a market stall. I was staring at a worn book covered in runes. I'd never seen this before. Some looked vaguely Japanese, and some Korean, and others entirely alien, which might be Thai. One symbol, it looked like silence itself, like a mute button carved into existence. And when I admitted I couldn't read them, everything shifted, and suddenly I wasn't in the market anymore, but in a dim, unreplaceable realm. A tall, slender figure in a black suit appeared. Their form flickered between male and female, and human and something far older. So they told me I had once been a warrior, a master archer, in fact. It even showed me an ancient painting of a child I recognized as myself holding a bow. And then, with an unsettling grace, they changed into their quote-unquote true form. A towering, armored woman wielding a great sword. A demigod or something worse. She explained that runes controlled reality and that everything was already written and altered and manipulated. She tempted me. Learn them and you'll be strong again. But when she said my cat carried rare energy that they needed, I refused. We fought, and at first her rune spells bounced off of me. I laughed, thinking they were fake, and she only smiled back, and the next rune worked, and suddenly I was upside down, bicycle riding across my feet in an endless white void. Seconds passed like centuries. The torment felt eternal. When she released me, she showed me realms. Paradise with immense trees and flawless skies. Hell, equally real, equally possible. Even cartoons and even movies all accessible through runes. I was briefly transformed into a cartoon character myself, a joke she seemed to enjoy. She led me down a corridor of mirrors, each one reflecting someone's home. In one mirror, I saw my own husband searching for me, and my dog could hear me from the other side, but not him. I pulled him through anyway, and together we wandered deeper, where animals were caged and twisted by experiments. So I screamed, "Is this what you want to do to my cat?" And her reply was cold. "Forever, he won't be yours again." My husband and I plotted quietly, pretend to learn and then destroy her. She was already inside my head, and she made me speak words I didn't want to say. Filthy things. Just to prove she could control me, and she warned, "Most who glimpse this knowledge go mad. Only the chosen survive." I saw flashes of famous artists and inventors scribbling at madness and their genius, really the scars of encountering runes. We tried to escape, and my phone rang, and it was my mother's face on the screen, but twisted and zombified, and her eyes glowing red. "You can't run." And I collapsed, begging for my old, flawed, but ordinary life back. Roads bent and shifted, and memories blurred, and at last, I met the figure again. With an amused half-smile, they whispered, "If you choose, you'll remember this as only a dream." And I woke up, and I thought I did. Each time I woke, the dream picked up exactly where it left off. Only after the final waking did it stop. But ever since that night, the world feels less real, and I still wonder if I'm trapped in one of those rune realms, waiting to notice the next crack in the walls. The piggy bank that wouldn't stay silent. When my son was born, his great-grandmother gave him a vintage piggy bank. Not the normal kind. It plays Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, after all. That's when you drop in a little coin. The first 5 months of his life, it sat harmlessly on our kitchen counter, quiet as could be. Recently, though, I moved into his nursery, and that's when things started changing. I began going off at random, singing that tiny little lullaby when no one was near it. It wasn't being touched or jostled or even looked at, but the song would play anyway. Nearly half a year it behaved perfectly, and why now? Then came the sleep paralysis. At first, I thought it was stress, but it kept happening. I'd wake up frozen with my heart pounding. Not only that, but with the overwhelming certainty that something was hovering near my son. It felt like invincible hands, or rather, invisible hands, were trying to take him. While I clawed my way back into my own body, it seemed. Each time, I woke up more terrified than the last. And then, stranger still, his belongings, they started to change. A few toys weren't where I left them. Harmless, maybe. But one day after a nap, I carried him to his favorite little swing, and the seat was destroyed and snapped in half as though someone had twisted it with force. It wasn't broken before, and I know because I buckle him into that swing every single day. It felt personal and almost cruel. The final straw was this morning. My son, who keeps a strict rhythm, down to 9 p.m., up at 7:30 sharp. He screamed awake at 5:30. When I rushed over, he was twisted sideways in his pack-and-play in his stomach, frantically searching the room. And in that hazy moment, as my eyes adjusted, I swear I saw a shape, a hunched shadow leaning over him. I lunged toward him and vanished, and he clung to me, trembling, refusing to calm for nearly an hour, as if he'd seen what I had, or worse. The piggy bank hasn't stopped its random singing, and I can't shake the thought that maybe it brought something with it. The song that opened a door. For about a week now, I've been haunted by a sensation I can't name, and it first emerged when I was listening to the aquatic mine track from Sonic Adventure 2. I had it looping like as background noise while sketching storyboards on my tablet. Decent choice. It wasn't the melody itself, but the strange familiarity that it carried, like brushing fingertips across the edge of a dream that I'd forgotten. A yearning, sharp and aching for something that didn't exist anymore, or maybe never existed at all. And years ago, I even made a Reddit post about similar dreams. Moments when ordinary objects, a chipped coffee mug, a broken eraser, a faded street sign, they would pulse with this overwhelming sorrow, as if they were keys to grief too vast to name. I tried mapping connections on my tablet, drawing arrows between songs and symbols and random images and stuff, and it was all in an attempt to tether that emotion. Part of this is for a dark fantasy novel I'm building. It's sort of a story stitched together with ancient theology and scraps of psychology, but a part of me just wanted to understand. Maybe I primed myself. I had been reading about Celtic burial rites and the fractal overlaps of Mesopotamian myths. And then, like a cherry on top, I stumbled across old forum threads where people on DMT swore they met geometric entities. Machine elves, they called them. I want to dismiss it all as a coincidence or imagination, and I still want to. Alrighty then. The Moonlit Dancers of Maggie Purnima. This tale has traveled through her family for decades, whispered and retold until it became almost legendary. It was said to have happened to my maternal grandmother's uncle, a man of stature, respected and feared, spent much of his leisure chasing deer through the forests of Assam. One January evening, as was their habit, he and his companions clambered up into a wooden machan, a high hunting platform tied between stout trees. The cold was biting, the kind that turned to breath into mist, and the moon was already swelling silver in the sky. The men settled down with rifles and stories, but as the hours crept past, most dozed off under wooden shawls. Only the uncle remained vigilant. That night was not ordinary. It was Maggie Purnima, a full moon revered in the Assamese calendar. And then the forest stirred, a sound delicate yet unearthly. It was rippling through the silence. The steady beat of a cool and ancient Assamese drum. He scanned the shadows until, under a towering salt tree, he saw them. Two figures, children, or perhaps not children at all. The boy wore a snow-white dhoti and a gamusa, his fingers kind of coaxing rhythm from the cool, while the girl, draped in a luminous chodor mekila, moved with grace that no human could quite match. They glowed not merely reflecting moonlight, but burning with their own radiance, as if the moon itself bowed before them. Entranced, the uncle forgot even the rifle in his hand. He might have watched till dawn, had fate not intervened. One of his friends, who was snoring quite heavily, he let out a loud cough, and in an instant, the dangers were gone, dissolved into the night like smoke. Awakened, the others listened wide-eyed as he recounted the vision. One friend whispered, "Tonight is auspicious. You're blessed. You should have asked with a clean heart. It might have granted your wish." But the forest had more to say. A rumbling grew around them like the thunder of invisible elephants circling their perch. Panic set in, until they remembered. Earlier, they had eaten their supper and scattered the leaf blades carelessly across the ground. And to add insult to sacrilege, the uncle had witnessed beings not meant for mortal eyes. Terrified, they scrambled down, gathered every plate, and burned them. Cleansing the space with ash, the elephant roar ceased, as if silenced by unseen command. Still, the hunt was ruined. Not a single prey crossed their path, and with heavy hearts, they returned home at dawn, carrying only the memory of what might have been. And I need to know where and what Assam is. I'm decent with a globe, but I don't know what they're talking about, and I'm going to find out right now. Okay, it's a place in India. Got it. The Girl on the Wall. After I was finally brought back from my grandmother's village, my father enrolled me in the school where he worked. And at that time, we lived in a small hut. It was patched together with bamboo walls and a tin roof. Eventually, my father saved enough to build a proper concrete house. He painted it pale blue. We moved in with a sense of pride. One night, while laying awake in that new house, I felt something strange. A sudden, icy touch pressed against my shoulder. It was as if somebody had placed a frozen palm on me. I was startled because I hadn't even dozed off yet. The night was unbearably hot. Summer power cuts had silenced the ceiling fan, and the air outside was dead still. The next morning, I told my mother, and she said nothing. But later, an elderly neighbor whispered to her, "Keep a close eye on that boy. Make sure no dark spirits brushes against him." The incident faded from memory, but months later, my younger uncle, my mother's brother, they came to stay. He often stumbled home late, drunk, and I usually avoided sharing his bed. But one evening he insisted, so I gave in. That night, I awoke to the eerie sensation of long nails dragging lightly across my face. Then something invisible seemed to crawl over me and settle on the far side of the bed. My cheeks burned and tingled as if scratched raw. Yet when I touched them, there were no marks. My uncle, lost in liquor-heavy sleep, didn't stir. The following day, I told my mother again. She only muttered that perhaps something had followed my uncle back through the dark streets. For years after, nothing happened. Life seemed normal. But then, without warning, the dreams began. A girl, young and beautiful, started appearing. She perched silently on the upper ledge of my room where I usually stored blankets. Her dark eyes were fixed on me. At first, she only watched, but sooner or later her face would twist and become monstrous. And at that very moment, I would wake in shame, drenched from a nightfall. Happened again and again, nearly every night, and with each dream I grew thinner and weaker and more hollow. One day, a local Oja, an old healer who had long known my family, came to our home. He was there to seal the house spiritually, so no spirit or thief could enter. Yet before I confessed anything, he looked at me closely and said to my mother, "Your boy is being trained." And I finally told him everything. I listened and gave me a small tabiz, an amulet tied with black thread, and I wore it around my neck. And from that day on, the girl on the wall never returned. The Night of the Shell Spirits. This story was passed down to me by my father, though it belonged originally to one of his uncles. It took place sometime in the late 1950s, around 1957 or so. At that time, his uncle often ventured into the forest of Oh boy. Just so you know, I'm not good with Indian words, so I'm just gonna march on through here. He ventured into the forests of Mangaldui, Assam, for solitary hunts. My father's ancestral home stood not far from those woods, and as usual, one evening his uncle set out alone. He climbed into a tree along a narrow forest path where deer and wild boar often wandered. That night the moon was full, flooding the jungle with a pale silver glow so bright it almost felt like daylight. But beyond the usual dangers of the forest, Assam was then in a grip of a cholera outbreak. Whole villages had suffered losses, though my father's uncle didn't know that the hamlet nearest to where he was currently waiting had been particularly devastated. While crouched silently on the branch, he heard the faint chime of anklets, gungroos, echoing through the undergrowth. At first he thought it might be a porcupine shuffling through the brush, the kind the locals called katelapahu, and he readied his rifle. As the sound grew nearer, he realized it was not the scuttling of any animal. Two figures slowly emerged into the clearing, and they were of medium height, draped in ragged cloth. But what struck him most was their decorations. Necklaces and anklets and even staffs studded with small white snail shells that glimmered in the moonlight. They walked with eerie slowness. With each step came the unmistakable tinkling of shells and anklets together. The uncle's breath caught, and these shapes did not look fully human. Their movements were deliberate, and their faces, half-shadowed, seemed stretched in unnatural ways. He tightened his grip on the gun. If they pass beneath me, he thought, I'm gonna shoot. When the figures finally reached the tree, he fired. The shot hit one directly, and in an instant, the form collapsed into a black crow, dropped lifeless to the earth. And the other figure let out a shriek so piercing it echoed through the forest and then fled, vanishing among the trees. At dawn, when his uncle dared to climb down, the dead crow still lay on the ground, stiff and black against the pale leaves. He didn't touch it. He simply turned and went home in silence. And from that night onward, he never again hunted alone in those forests of Mangaldui. The Voice by the Window. This little incident is practically folklore in our family now, because my grandmother loved to tell it whenever the lights flickered or a dog barked strangely at night. And back then, my elder grandfather, whom everybody called Bade Nana, or Bade Nana, or something of the sort. They worked long night shifts at a railway station instead of a water pump. Like clockwork, he would leave before sunset and return at dawn, his lunch tin clinking with every step. That night was no different. He left for duty and the family ate their meal, and the whole house, an old creaky bungalow with wide verandas, settled into silence. But some time past midnight, my elder grandmother, Body Nani, stirred awake. Her bed stood right by the window, and from the darkness outside came a familiar voice. "O Aiti, come out. I need to relieve myself." It was unmistakably Body Nana's voice, still half asleep, and she rose and began to walk toward the door. Luckily, my maternal grandmother, my Nani, she saw her, and she had heard it too. Alarmed, she stopped her at once. "Where are you going?" she whispered. "Don't you hear? It's Poulin calling me." Body Nani replied, naming her husband. Nani's tone sharpened. "Are you mad? How could Poulin be here? He's at work miles away. Whatever you heard, it isn't him. Go back to bed." And so she did. The next morning, gossip flowed like tea. Neighbors claimed the spirit of a woman who had just died in the nearby village was roaming that night. In fact, Rana, a boy from across the bamboo thicket, had lost his mother that very evening. People swore they heard the cracking of bamboo stalks. Katulua, an omen no Assamese villager takes lightly. And here's the unsettling part. My father once told me this wasn't the only time. Some months earlier, something similar had happened to my uncle Jintu. One night, he heard a call from beyond the door. "Oh, Jintu, step outside for a moment." But this voice this time sounded strangled, like somebody speaking through a rope tied too tightly around the throat. Uncle Jintu did not go out either. And perhaps that is why he is still alive to tell the tale. The Mist at the Well. This tale comes from my grandmother. She swore it happened in the early days of her marriage. One late morning, she was preparing lunch. That day, instead of the usual vegetables, somebody had brought home a basket of fresh fish. So with her sleeves rolled up, she carried the fish toward the stone well at the edge of the yard to wash them. The air was still, and cicadas were buzzing in the trees. But just as she reached the well, she noticed something moving from the direction of the bamboo grove behind the house. At first, she thought it was just smoke drifting from a neighbor's cooking fire. She paid little attention. And then it stopped right in front of her. And only when she looked carefully did she realize it was not smoke. It was something else. A pale figure, whitish and formless, swaying as though it were caught in a breeze that wasn't there. She described it as half mist, half shadow, with no clear face and no voice. Just a silent, hovering presence. And then it leaned closer. She could hardly believe it, but it seemed to be sniffing at the fish in her hands, like some unseen creature drawn by the smell. Terrified, she dropped the fish where she stood. They scattered across the ground with a thud. Without a second thought, she sprinted back to the house, shouting for my grandfather and the neighbors. When the men arrived moments later, the fish were still lying there, but the white mist had vanished completely, leaving behind nothing. My grandmother always said it wasn't a dream. She remembered it too clearly. The stillness and the hovering form, the way it bent toward the fish like it hungered for them. But to this day, nobody knows what she encountered at that well. The woman who wouldn't be caught. This story came from my mother's younger brother. One night he was making his way on foot to a relative's house. The path was long but familiar, one that he had walked so often that he never thought twice about it. That evening, the moon was unusually full, bathing the quiet road in silver light, and as he strolled along, he spotted a woman ahead of him. She was wrapped in a deep crimson mekhala chador, moving slowly as though lost in thought, and at first he paid her little mind. But after a while, he realized something strange. No matter how quickly he walked, he never seemed to get closer. She remained just far enough ahead, gliding at the same unhurried pace. Curious, he called out softly, "Wydio," an Assamese way of addressing an elder sister. But she didn't turn, didn't even flinch. And that's when his stomach tightened. For the first time, he noticed her feet, or rather the absence of them, touching the earth. She was floating, hovering just above the ground, her shadow gliding unnaturally smooth across the moonlit road. Cold fear struck him, and my uncle bolted, his heart pounding, until he reached the safety of a house belonging to an acquaintance. Bursting inside, he asked one of the women there if she had just been outside. She looked at him puzzled and shook her head. Shaken, he poured out everything he had seen, and from that night onward, he refused to walk that road after dark. And in our traditions, such a spirit is often called a chudayo. In Assamese, we have another word for her, a butuni. The Boy by the Gate. What I'm about to tell you, it might sound absurd, maybe even laughable, but honestly, I don't blame you if you think I imagined it all. But the truth is, when it happened, the fear I felt was far too real to ignore. This was back when I was in second grade. Every morning, our school gathered for assembly on the field. And that day, just like always, I stood among the students, chanting the prayer. My hands were folded, but my eyes, well, they were half open, and I was sneaking glances at my classmates and the teachers and the line of bicycles parked near the fence. And then I saw it, right by the iron gate at the far corner of the field, where a crooked banyan tree grew. There was a boy standing. A boy who looked exactly like me. Same haircut, same uniform, even the same little scar on his eyebrow. And he wasn't moving, just staring straight at me. At first I told myself it was just my eyes and they were just doing something strange, maybe playing some sort of a trick on me. I tried blinking real hard and I tried rubbing my face. Grabbed a bottle of water and just threw it as hard as I could in my face. Even shut my eyes for a moment. But when I opened them again, he's still there watching, and I'm dripping into Dasani. A cold dread was filling me. I was here among hundreds of children. So who was standing at that gate, wearing my face, watching me do something strange with a water bottle? It was like looking at a mirror that had stepped out into the world. I wanted to scream, but my throat froze, and instead I just shut my eyes tight, whispering the last lines of the prayer with a trembling voice. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself. And then the bell rang. The prayer ended. I opened my eyes again. The corner by the gate was empty. No boy, just the tree swaying gently in the breeze. I never saw him again. Not once, not ever. Was it a trick of the mind or a dream I had while half awake? Or was it something else? Something I wasn't meant to understand? I'll let you decide. The Tall Shadow by the Lake. This tale was passed down to me by my father. a memory etched from his childhood in a small Assamese village. He and his brothers were restless boys then, always wandering into mischief. But their favorite pastime was fishing at the village pond with an old net. At first, the pond was generous. Each throw of the net brought up wriggling silver fish. But over time, the water grew stingy. Day after day, their net came up empty. Not even a stray minnow in there. Frustration turned to suspicion, and they began blaming an old man who lived alone nearby. He was known for rising before dawn, and the boys whispered that he must be sneaking out to rob them of their catch. Determined to prove it, they plotted an ambush. So one night they set their alarm before the rooster stirred. At around 3:30, the moon still hanging pale above the trees, they crept barefoot to the pond's edge. From the shadows, they spotted a figure crouching over their net. Convinced it was the old man, they shouted, "Oi, stop stealing our fish, old man." But then the figure rose, and it kept rising. My father insists it loomed at least 10 feet tall, and its outline was strange and too long and too crooked and too fluid to be human. For a heartbeat, they froze. They were paralyzed by shock. Then fear overwhelmed them, and they bolted all the way back home without daring to look back. And when they breathlessly recounted the vision, the elders nodded grimly. It wasn't the old man. It was the Gurapak. In Assamese folklore, the Gurapak is a water-dwelling spirit, a demon with the torso of a human and the lower half of a horse, though some claim it appears only as a shifting shadow. It's said to lure victims with illusions, bending its form at will. Some confuse it with another being called the Dot, but whether they're kin or one and the same, no one seems to agree. One fact, however, is never disputed. These creatures haunt the edges of lakes and rivers, masters of disguise, patient in their lurking. And after that encounter, my father and his brother swore never to fish at that pond again. And to this day, whenever he tells the story, his voice drops low, as if afraid the Gurapak still listens from the water's edge. The hair-clad shadow. This unsettling chapter unfolded in my aunt's life. My mother's younger sister. We were there to witness it all. And after her marriage, my aunt endured years of heartbreak. Every time she conceived, the pregnancy would end in a miscarriage. The physical pain was one thing, but the true horror came from the presence that stalked her. It would follow her into the bathroom, hover in the dim light of the hallways, and peek at her from the corners of rooms. It wasn't human. The creature's entire body was covered in tangled black hair, with the posture of a crouching animal, part wolf, part bear. My mother, strangely, had also seen something like it around the time I was born. I remember she once whispered to me late at night. Finally, my mother convinced my aunt to come stay with us, just a few miles away on a small settlement where an old spiritual healer and Oja our family trusted for decades still practiced. When my aunt and uncle explained her tragedies to him, he revealed something chilling. This was not random misfortune, but the result of black magic. A woman my aunt once called her closest friend had cursed her years ago, binding that hairy entity to her so she would never become a mother. The Oja prepared a talisman, heavy piece of silver etched with symbols, and instructed her on rituals that she had to perform before wearing it. That evening, while sitting in their car after my uncle's dance rehearsal, she slipped it on and her body trembled and her vision blurred, but soon the dizziness passed. But the entity was not done. Strangely, my uncle began seeing it too, just brief flashes. A hairy figure crossing mirrors or vanishing behind doors. The Oja gave him a separate talisman, and the vision stopped. And before that, my uncle often dreamt of a creature brushing against him, trying and failing to touch his skin. What followed was nothing short of a miracle. My aunt carried her next pregnancy to term, and months later she gave birth to a baby boy. And today he runs around the courtyard, laughing and alive, never knowing the shadow that almost kept him from ever being born. The Man Who Sleeps with Aliens. This tale came to me not over beer, but on a dusty California job site. I'm a pipeline inspector, and the storyteller was part of an excavation crew, and he's from Oaxaca, Mexico. 6 years old now. Still built like he could swing a pickaxe for 12 hours straight at that. And one morning, we're just staring up at circling clouds and swapping thoughts about satellites. He suddenly broke in with, "No rain today, maybe UFOs." That was it. No explanation, no smirk, just deadpan certainty. A few days later, while just waiting around for permits, I decided to poke at him. "So, Miguel, why do you actually believe in aliens?" He didn't even pause. "Absolutely. Plenty. I've got stories, my friend." And he did. The Night of the Green Face. As a boy in Mexico, he said he would sometimes wake frozen in bed. 4 or 5 times a year even. He'd be unable to move or breathe. Inches from his face hung a pale green hand with too many joints. Behind it loomed a face, ridges on its scalp, lidless black eyes, and a wide nose flat like stone. Its skin looked chalky white under the moon. Terrified, he started sleeping in his grandmother's bed, but the visitations followed him there too. The Creature by the Well. One evening at dusk, in their garden, he saw the same figure crouched behind the family stone well. He swore he yelled, and his grandmother came running. The thing hurled itself into the water. Together, they leaned over and saw ripples dancing, and it was bottomless. He insisted, and so was the water. The strange implant. Around that same time, Miguel discovered a hard bump in his wrist, no wider than a pencil eraser. It buzzed faintly, and sometimes he could even rotate it under the skin. While it was there, he swore he had glimpses of the future, especially in games. He said he could leap twice as far as anyone else, floating like he had springs in his bones. His classmates noticed, and even his teacher joked that Miguel must have wings. And then one day the lump vanished, and so did the jumping and the visions. No scar remained. Lights in the sky. Years later in California, before sunrise, he counted 60 or so glowing orbs crossing the sky in perfect lines. Some broke apart, releasing smaller lights, like seeds spilling from a pomegranate. On another job site, talking with a coworker, he spotted a glowing sphere the size of a basketball rolling through the brush, dragging a pink and violet tail like fireworks. It shot upward and it vanished. He once saw an oval craft, maybe 6 feet wide, was hanging in the air, and in a blink it shot down to the tree line, then drifted sideways across the horizon as if gliding on invisible rails. And those weren't even all the orb stories. The conviction in his eyes. What struck me wasn't just the stories, it was the fever in his eyes as he told them. He would gesture wildly. He would lower his voice and break into laughter, half afraid and half thrilled. We worked the whole day with him, picking up all these tales between tasks. But by the end, I wasn't sure what to believe. But I knew this. Miguel believed, and that was unsettling enough. The alarms in the in-law wing. It was just past midnight. That's when every single smoke alarm in the house, they all erupted at once. That by itself isn't unusual. Systems can glitch. But after about 2 minutes, they all went quiet, leaving me wandering the halls trying to figure out which one had started the chain reaction. Nothing. I just convinced myself it was some electrical hiccup when, bam, they started again. This time they didn't stop. After several minutes of nonstop shrieking, I gave up and called the fire department, started checking each unit again. Here's the thing. We've got an in-law wing in the house. That part has a history. My grandmother, grandfather, and later my father, they all passed away in those rooms. I hadn't checked the detectors over there before making the call, so I walked across, flashlight in hand. That's when my stomach dropped. Right outside their bedrooms, there's 2 detectors, a smoke alarm and a CO detector. The smoke alarm's red light was flashing. Clearly, the one triggered, but the CO detector wasn't triggered at all. It was dangling by its wire, half twisted out of the ceiling. That thing doesn't just fall out. You have to twist hard to free it. The moment my mom came over and stood with me in that hallway, the alarm stopped, dead silent, and after 20 straight minutes of screaming, they just quit. And neither of us had touched them. The fire crew arrived a few minutes later. One guy asked me to take down the smoke alarm that had been flashing. I twisted it loose and nearly dropped it. It was already unplugged. Unplugged, yet it had set off the whole system. I stared at the ceiling socket in disbelief. How could it blare while being completely disconnected? And how did the CO detector right next to it end up hanging loose at the same time? 2 of the firefighters exchanged a look, and one asked, "Is this an older house?" "No," I told him. "It's a brand new construction." But that wing was added on for my grandparents. He gave a half smile and said, "Makes sense, I've seen weird stuff like this in older homes. Paranormal type things." Then after hearing about the deaths in that wing, he added, "Yeah, I think I'll stick to the other side of the house." I didn't sleep after they left, and to make it stranger, the alarms went haywire on the very night a massive family feud boiled over with one of my dad's cousins. My dad would have hated that fight. Part of me wonders if he was making a point, rattling the detectors just to get my attention. But the logical part of my brain can't explain it. The smoke alarm that only triggers when powered, when it was unplugged, while its neighbor was twisted out of the ceiling at the same time. Alarms don't play games like that on their own, I don't think. Wild night. Still not sure if I'm more afraid of my relatives or the house. The girl in the violet raincoat. So yeah, a girl came crying to me in a dream. Back when I was 14, my nights were full of strange, unsettling dreams. Sometimes it felt less like I was sleeping, more like I was living a second life in some shadowy parallel world. Meeting people I'd never seen before, talking, existing, and then forgetting. This time was no different. I was wandering through a city I didn't recognize. The rain was hammering down, the kind that soaks through your clothes in seconds. The streets were narrow and lined with tall, gray apartment blocks that leaned in like they wanted to smother the sky out. I didn't bother to look for shelter. Instead, I kept walking until I found myself in a dead quiet neighborhood. Just endless walls and windows all closed off, like the world had stopped breathing. I gave up exploring and I sat down on a curb, waiting to wake up. I knew it was a dream. My hands were cold and wet, and I watched the raindrops race down my fingers and then footsteps. They were running ones. It was sharp against the silence, and I ignored it at first, thinking it was just another trick of the sleeping brain. But then she appeared. A girl, my age, maybe black hair, plastered to her face too. A violet raincoat clinging to her small frame, and she was crying and wide-eyed like she had just escaped something terrible. She rushed straight to me, grabbed me, and begged for me to help her. And behind her, more footsteps. Someone was chasing her. I panicked, but I pulled her along anyway, searching for anywhere safe. I couldn't remember how I got there, not even in my dream. My memory felt like smoke slipping through my hands. Finally, I spotted a shuttered bookstore and I pulled her beneath its awning. The rain still dripped down, but at least we weren't exposed. She kept sobbing and whispering that I should leave her again, or rather that I shouldn't. Again, it was as if we'd met before, like there were bruises on her arms and legs and dark, ugly marks. I don't know what to say, so I promised her I wouldn't go, and she clung to me. The fingers were digging into my shirt, refusing to let go. At some point, I must have dozed off inside the dream. When I opened my eyes, she was asleep too, still trying to clutch me, and for a moment I thought we were safe. The footsteps had vanished, but then that familiar tug waking me up. My body knew it was time to leave, and I stood and the moment started her awake too. She looked at me with terror, already knowing what was happening. She cried again, begged me not to leave her, and her voice cracked as she told me somebody was hurting her, and that if I left, she'd be lost. I tried to reason with myself. It's just a dream, none of this is real, and I whispered an apology. I told her I was sorry. I just couldn't stay, and she broke sobbing harder, telling me to come find her again, begging. And that's when I saw him, the one chasing her. He came out of nowhere, arms wrapping around her from behind and pinning her like a trap snapping shut. She screamed, and she looked at me one last time, crying and begging. And then I woke up. And I woke up crying too, and my heart was racing so fast I thought I might break through my ribs. I tried to remember her face, and I tried to place her. But she was no one I knew, just a black-haired girl in a violet raincoat, bruised, broken, and trapped inside a dream I could never return to. And the worst part is, I said I'd try to find her again, but I never did. The Porch Lullaby. So I'm home alone. It's like 12:45 in the afternoon. The sun's blazing. I'm just vibing. I step outside and I sit on the porch leaning back like I've got nothing better to do. The air feels heavy but calm, and birds are flapping around somewhere. Neighbors' dogs barking and cars are rolling down the street. To my right, there's this old wooden fence, and behind it, wild weeds and crooked trees that look like they've been abandoned since forever. So I'm half zoning out, half scanning the shadows. Like maybe I'll catch something strange if I stare long enough. And then out of nowhere it happens. I hear this whisper. At first it's faint, like wind sneaking through leaves. And then it starts to grow clearer. Not loud, not sharp. It's right in my ear, like somebody's leaning close and humming. A lullaby, a slow, haunting little tune. My first thought is, well, maybe my phone's on. Maybe some random playlist started. But nah, the screen's black and TV inside's dead silent. The hum keeps going, sweet and soft, and I can't shake the idea that it's coming from the trees. And the weirdest part is it doesn't feel evil. Not in a horror movie way. It's gentle, almost like it wants me to come closer. And that's what makes it worse. Like it's bait. So I do the only thing that makes sense. I started humming my own song, my favorite one. Louder than her and steady and stubborn. And she keeps at it for a minute, but slowly, like mist burning off under the sun, her voice thins out and fades away. Next thing I know, the world snaps back. Cars are swishing by and birds are chattering nonsense. A dog barking again with itchy ears. It's like she was never there at all. The house that wasn't there. So here's the deal. My neighbor, we're going to call him Mark, he lives downstairs. Our families often eat together, and a couple of weeks ago over dinner, Mark told us this story. I swear he looked genuinely rattled while talking about it. He wasn't joking, and the way he described it gave me chills. The story goes back to 2006, when Mark was in his late 20s. His son had just been born, and money was tight. He worked unloading trucks at a warehouse, sometimes pulling double shifts too. It was barely enough to cover rent. His wife stayed home with the baby, so every bill felt like a mountain. Mark admitted he was in a dark place back then. One evening after a particularly rough day, he stopped at a quiet bar before heading home. He sat alone with a cheap beer and he stared at the table. And that's when a stranger slid into the stool beside him. The man was middle-aged and wearing a worn leather jacket, and he just had this presence. He asked Mark why he looked so crushed. Mark, tired and hopeless, spilled everything. The baby, the money troubles, the fear he wouldn't make it. The stranger chuckled softly and said, "You'll be all right, my friend. I see good things for you. Here, take this number. Call it tomorrow. They'll help you." He scribbled a number on the back of a receipt, finished his drink, paid for Mark's beer, and left. Mark shoved the paper into his wallet and forgot about it. But after a few days, when things felt unbearable, he decided to dial the number. And a voice answered immediately. "Hello, Mark, I've been expecting your call." And that freaked him out, because how did they know his name? Still, she calmly gave him an address in town called Varna. It's about an hour's drive away. She told him to visit soon. Against his better judgment, Mark drove there the following Saturday. The address led to a small house with faded blue shutters like something out of another decade. A rather older woman greeted him at the door, scarf tied neatly over her hair. "Welcome, Mark. I'm glad you came." The house inside was unsettling. One large whitewashed room, no furniture except for a desk, 2 chairs and a clock that ticked far too loud. She offered him coffee and spoke gently. "I know about your son, and I know you feel lost, but this won't last. You'll find steady work soon, and your family will be secure. You'll even have another child, a daughter, and she'll bring joy into your life." She didn't handpick him any applications, no phone numbers, no promise of a contact, just words. Mark, uncomfortable, even tried to give her money, assuming she was some kind of a fortune teller. She refused, almost offended, and told him to leave. Weeks passed by with no change, and then one day by chance, Mark bumped into an old friend from school. The friend worked for a shipping company and told him they were hiring for positions on international cargo vessels. Mark applied, got in, and suddenly had a stable, well-paid career. And over the years, he moved up the ranks. Fast forward a year later, grateful and curious, Mark decided to return to Varna to thank the mysterious woman. He brought flowers and wine. When he reached the town, something horrifying happened. The street she had given him did not exist. He asked locals and showed them the slip of paper. Every single person said the same thing. There's no house like that here. Never has been. Mark insists he wasn't drunk and wasn't hallucinating. He remembers the ticking clock and the bitter coffee in her exact words. But the house, gone? As if it had never even existed. So to this day, nearly 20 years later, he still can't explain it. The girl who wasn't there. Let me begin by saying this took place, if it really did, when I was no more than 5. Around the time of kindergarten. Still, the memory or illusion of one, it followed me through every stage of childhood like a loose thread I could never stop tugging at. Could it be a false memory? Well, absolutely. And yet I recalled it so often and examined it from so many angles that I know it once felt sharp and vivid and alive, even if it's grown hazy with time. I even remember remembering sitting in my room years later, trying to make sense of the pieces. Occasionally mentioning it to my parents or brother only to get puzzled looks from them. So here's the story. So I wasn't very good at making friends, and in fact the first 2 friends my brother and I ever made were the kids 2 doors down. They were siblings, and they were close to age to us. I can still see us tumbling around in their backyard with a red tricycle, plastic trucks, and a battered sandbox. We were already friends by then, and I remembered that much. The boy, let's call him N, with my brother's age. His sister M was my age. What struck me about M was her hair was pale and golden, almost silvery. Not impossible in my part of the world, but rare enough to stick in my mind. She had a button nose and sun-warmed skin and a laugh that made me feel, for the first time, like I belonged somewhere. Then came the day that doesn't fit. One afternoon, N marched up her patio with his sister beside him and announced proudly, "This is M." Only the girl at his side wasn't the girl I knew. This M had chestnut dark hair, a longer nose, and a face shaped differently. Her skin was cooler in tone, more like the people around us usually looked. She carried the same name and the same place in his family, but not the same identity I remembered. I felt a jolt of recognition mixed with refusal. I remember thinking, whether at this very moment or later, but I already knew M and she isn't this girl. And from that day onward, M was always the dark-haired sister. We moved away a few years later and lost touch. When I met her again as an adult, she was still that same woman N had introduced, not the golden-haired child I first befriended. And the oddest part is, this hair color was unusual where I grew up. I didn't have many friends at that age, so the chance that I'm confusing her with someone else is feeling kinda slim. My mother herself had been fair-haired as a child, so I know it wasn't impossible, but still, can't point to anyone else that she might have been. I even remember once asking their parents, "When can we see the old M again?" and receiving only a puzzled response by saying, "This is M." So what was it, like a glitch in my memory or a dream so real it fused with reality, or something stranger, like the kind of secret children sometimes stumble upon without understanding? I made my peace with not knowing, but the image of that first M, the girl who wasn't there, stayed with me all my life. The shot that echoed. This all unfolded about 4 months ago. It's been replaying in my head so often that I'm hoping writing it down will help me let it go. I've never put much faith into things like heaven, hell, or reincarnation. The only constant I do know is that I carry a memory that doesn't feel like mine, but it's lived inside me for as long as I can remember now. And I'm nearly 30 now, and I can recall turning it over in my mind even when I was 6. In the memory, I'm not myself, I'm not a woman, I'm a young man. I'm sitting on a cracked concrete bench near an old outdoor basketball court. The chain-link fence is bent in places and spray paint tags crawling all over it. A faint haze of smoke drifts from a nearby sewer grate. I can feel my hands clasped tightly together. I smell the metallic tang of the cold night air. I hear 5 other, young men, and they're teasing each other as they play ball under a dim street lamp. My body feels frail and drained, like I've been sick for long. I know without words that I won't be around much longer, and that's why I'm watching, not playing. But oh, I ache to get up, take the ball, and prove myself. Instead, I just sit there, smiling faintly at their laughter. I glance down, and my legs are longer than mine are in real life. They're clad in faded jeans with frayed hems, and on my feet are beat-up sneakers, the right one with a hole near the toe, and I nudge an empty bottle with the tip of my shoe, and it rolls noisily across the concrete. It settles among fast food wrappers and cigarette butts. Suddenly, the game draws my attention back. One of my friends takes a shot. His ball hits the rim and rattles the torn net. It drops straight into a dented trash can by the fence. The hollow thunk of it landing makes everyone burst into laughter, and I laugh too, quietly. And then the memory ends. For years, I assumed it was just something I'd absorbed from a movie or a commercial when I was young. Something my brain stitched into a sort of false memory. I didn't think much of it. Until this one night at work. I'm a shift worker, and deadlines in my job often mean long, strange hours. One morning around 5:30, a handful of us were waiting on a final decision before we could clock out. A woman from another department, someone I only knew in passing, was sitting with us. We were all running on fumes. And, as often happens on night shifts, the conversation turned philosophical. Life and death and what might come after that. When reincarnation came up, I stayed quiet, too tired to weigh in, but she jumped in. She said with complete conviction that she knew she had lived before. She described herself as a young man obsessed with basketball in a big U.S. city, maybe Chicago. She talked about her tight-knit circle of friends and how they'd once met up after losing one of their own. She remembered them playing ball, remembered her shot bouncing off the rim, and she grinned as she said it. It landed right in a trash can. The room filled with the usual night shift jokes about whether she missed having guy parts, and the subject veered off, and I didn't join in. I couldn't. I knew in that moment, and I knew it. Of course, there were differences. She recalled a humid summer night, and I've always felt mine is bone cold, and she thought it was Chicago. I always assumed somewhere like New York. But still, the trash can shot and the laughter and the same memory. And since then, I can't stop thinking about it. Haven't told anyone, not even her. And she's actually very kind. About my age, and probably somebody I could be friends with if I wasn't so wary now. But I can't shake the unease. It could just be coincidence. Rationally, I know that. But to hear someone else's version, breathing life into a memory that you've carried along for decades, that's not something you forget. The Whisper in the Wardrobe. It was the winter of 2017. I was living in a rented flat in Bangalore. A compact single room with the bathroom squeezed into the corner. It was late January, one of those mildly cold nights when you'd rather not open a window. Everything was shut tight, the doors, the windows, even the curtains. The clock showed 12:10 a.m., technically Sunday already, which meant no office the next day. I've always been curious about paranormal stuff, and that night I was scrolling through ghost stories on Reddit. I was on my phone and I had this silly app called Spirit Radar. I never took it seriously, but out of boredom I thought, why not give it a spin? So I started pacing around my room with the app running. Near the bed, nothing. Near the bathroom, silence. Near the little balcony door, dead calm. But the moment I walked toward the old wooden wardrobe, the screen lit up in frantic flashes like it was screaming about a presence. I laughed it off, thinking it was just some glitch. Restarted the app, same result. Always near the wardrobe, and this time just a test. I launched the app while standing directly beside it. Instantly, beep, blink, red warning. That gave me a pause, and half joking, half nervous, I sat on my bed and said out loud, "All right, if something's really hiding in there, show me a sign." The next second, with a slow creak that chilled my spine, the wardrobe doors swung open on their own, and I froze. My heart was pounding. But nothing came out. No shadow, no whisper. Just the hollow dark inside. Lived in that flat for another year, though. The wardrobe never moved again. Nothing bad ever happened. The Shadows of Windsor. Hi. I once worked at Windsor Castle, more precisely in the Royal Library, from the tail end of the 1980s until I resigned in 2001, shortly after my second child was born. So I wanted to be home more, and truthfully, after all that I'd seen within those walls, I didn't mind stepping away. I wasn't really anyone of note, just a junior assistant. My days are spent cataloging manuscripts and fetching delicate volumes and helping maintain the sort of treasures that never see daylight. The Royal Library is not public, and everything's preserved with a kind of reverence. Controlled lights, regulated air, and rules upon other rules. But Windsor did have another collection, not of books, but of ghosts. I didn't believe any of it when I first started, but that changed pretty quickly. The first spirit I encountered was none other than Henry VIII. Yep, him. It was 1991. I was shelving in one of the quieter annexes late at night. I looked up to find a massive figure of Tudor garb just standing just inside the door, arms behind his back, face thunderous. He said nothing, only stared as though weighing my soul. And then, without a step, he seemed to dissolve backward into the stone wall. I stood frozen, clutching a 17th century atlas like a shield. And that wasn't the only presence. There's a black spaniel who sort of roams the western side of the library. Everybody knew about it, though nobody admitted it outright. I mean, I saw it twice. Once it padded right through my desk. When I turned to follow it, the corridor was empty, and somebody once whispered it belonged to a young princess who died centuries ago. I don't know. All I know is the air went cold whenever it appeared. Here's a small list of other oddities throughout the years. Footsteps in the galleries when nobody was there. Whispers in French, sometimes Latin, from sealed rooms. Books opening themselves and pages stirring as if in a breeze. A pale man in Victorian dress glaring from behind a locked door, though the archive was empty when we checked. It wasn't constant, but it was enough to make me stop doubting. I never told the story outside of private conversations, and even now I sort of hesitate. Working in a royal residence comes with an unspoken pact. Keep silent. But after 2 decades, I thought somebody out there might understand. Haven't set foot in Windsor since I left. I don't think I plan to.
Welcome to the crossroads of reality and the unexplained. Paranormal M invites you to join us on this quest for truth. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss a moment of our mind-boggling investigations and encounters with the supernatural. Weird stuff happening in my son's room. So since yesterday, I've seen some weird things happening in my son's bedroom. Most prominent was when my husband was putting him to sleep last night. I was laying in my living room browsing the phone, and I heard a knock on his bedroom door. And when I looked up, I saw the doorknob turning. Thinking my husband is asking me to come to the room, I opened the door and saw my husband rocking him to sleep on the bed. Nowhere close to the door. I asked him if he had knocked on the door, and he said that he thought I knocked on the door from the outside, as he heard the knock too. We thought, okay, whatever, let's not think too much about it. Once he came out, he told me it's a little bit weird because the cupboard doors keep opening themselves. I've seen it too in the past, but never paid much attention. Later at night, around 12-ish, we saw on camera that our son was restless. So my husband came in to settle him and then called me. The room had a burnt smell. Not burnt like ashes, sort of, and it was a little hazy, like smokish. I opened the door to the balcony to check if someone was burning some waste outside, but that was all clear. No smell outside. We moved him to a different room. In the past, there's also been instances of me seeing shadows on camera, but ignoring it as light. The baby just woke up screaming and then crying inconsolably. We're both non-believers, so I'm sure that there is a logical explanation to all these instances. Would love to hear them, to put my mind at ease, but would also like to hear things so I can sort of make the vibes better at home. Finally getting to share this. This happened in the summer of 2007. It was told by me that the two girls who experienced it, who were friends of mine at the time, and also a couple. This is important for later. It all happened in central Italy, in Lazio, the region where Rome is. And I need to give some context about this. The area around Rome is full of hills. Most of that region is. And underneath many of these hills sit ancient Roman/pre-Christian catacombs. So many, in fact, that they're not even that big of a deal for the locals. And some of these catacombs even got converted into wine cellars or basements over the centuries. Some haven't. Again, this is important for later. Now these two girls, we'll call them E and C, were in their early 20s, had been together for a year or so back then, and given how ludicrously expensive rents in Rome are, decided to try their luck finding a flat in one of the small towns around that area. On those hills I've mentioned. Mind you, those hills aren't ominous at all. If you've ever seen pictures of Tuscany, that's what they look like, which is rather lovely. And they did find a small apartment for rent in one of those towns. A renovated flat on the second floor of a much older house, which isn't surprising at all in that region, as many houses are centuries old and just get renovated from time to time. On the ground floor of that apartment, there were some neighbors, but they never got to see too much of them. A couple of apartments with old people living in them. There was also a very old, sturdy wooden door, which was always closed and locked by a padlock. And when they asked the landlord where it led to, he told them that it was a door to some old cellar nobody really used anymore, and supposedly was connected to one of the catacombs I've mentioned earlier. Again, it's an ancient country, and such things don't come across as particularly weird to us. Neither it did to E or C, who just shrugged it off like, okay, makes sense. So E and C spent a few months in that town, not really bonding with anyone, mainly commuting from there to Rome and back to work. C and E both study. However, being a homosexual couple in an old town full of old and bigoted people, they quickly started noticing how unwelcome they really were there. They'd go to the local store to buy food, and the clerk would ignore them on purpose. They'd find their mailbox emptied of all of their mail scattered over the floor outside their apartment. They'd even bump into people riding scooters around town, passing them and yelling, "Goddamn lesbians." In short, they didn't have the best time there, but they knew it was only a temporary solution, so they decided to just endure it while all the waiting to move again. And yes, FYI, Italy is still majorly conservative on the topic of LGBTQ, even more so now than 16 years ago. Then one morning, as she was stepping outside to go to the car to drive to Rome, E found something on the ground floor right in front of the flat's door. A mussel shell had been placed there, with a doused red candle in it. And judging by the mess it made and how short the candle was by now, it had been burning for the whole night. Not knowing what to do with it, she picked up the shell of the candle and threw it in the garbage, together with all the wax that she could scoop up from the floor. Another thing she noticed when she finally set out to leave was that the door, the sturdy wooden door downstairs that had always been closed up to that point, wasn't locked anymore. The padlock was gone, and it was opened just by a crack, but she didn't really pay too much attention to it right then. But then things started happening. At first, it was an uneasy feeling E and C would be when they were in their living room sitting on the couch, reading, chatting, watching a movie, and suddenly they'd have this feeling like someone was watching them. Later on, it became more than that. They'd hear noises around the house, like someone knocking on the walls in another room, or a toilet flushing on its own, water taps turning on by themselves in the kitchen. Quickly, it became less than bearable. One night, as they were sleeping, they both woke up in the middle of the night hearing footsteps of bare feet in the living room. They started listening. It felt like the footsteps were simply pacing around. There was nothing else, no voices, no items being moved, just the sound of bare feet in their living room. After a while, C, feeling understandably scared, whispered, "What's that?" to E, and as she did, the footsteps stopped, as if noticing her voice in the silence of the apartment. They stopped, and a split second later, they started sprinting toward their bedroom. E grabbed C and turned her face away from the door, doing so herself, just moments before the footsteps came through their bedroom's door and stopped to the side of the bed. "Don't look, whatever happens now, don't look," E told C, and held her in her arms for the rest of the night. Neither of them sleeping, just listening in for those footsteps to finally leave, or whoever it was to do something, anything at all. But nothing happened. They spent the next 3 hours wide awake in silence until dawn came, and with that bit of sunlight finally shining through, E found the courage to turn around, and nothing was there. Another night, E, who was in university at the time, was up late studying in their living room as C was sleeping. Like I said before, it was summer, and the window in the living room was open. She wasn't facing it. The window was to her left as she was sitting at the table taking notes. Suddenly, she felt the hair on the back of her head stand and had that familiar feeling of being watched. So, she instinctively turned to the window. She described what she saw as a completely pitch-black human-like figure perched on the windowsill, with no features on its face, save for the two very large orange glowing eyes. who just stood there, motionless and staring at me. She couldn't tell me for how long she stared at it. She told me she felt completely paralyzed and helpless, and had the feeling that she had tried to move or do anything that thing would have lunged at her. Eventually, she couldn't hold it anymore, turned around and closed her eyes, took a long, deep breath, and looked again, and it was gone. After that, they contacted their landlord and decided to leave for good. They did so within a week since that event. The last thing he noticed as they were finishing packing their things up and leaving was that big wooden door, the one who had been left open ever since all those events had begun, was now once again closed and locked shut with a padlock. I hope you enjoyed. It's been 14 years since I was told all this. And ever since then, I've never sort of shared any of these conversations, but with a few trusted friends. I've been meaning to write it down eventually, but never got around to it. And no, sadly, I don't know the name of the town where this all happened. I'm not in touch with E or C anymore, so I couldn't find out more even if I wanted to. But knowing myself and what a massive dumbass I can be, I don't much mind not knowing, because I know I'd be tempted to go and take a look for myself. And that doesn't sound like it would lead anywhere constructive. Ask Reddit. When I was a child, I had a lot of trouble sleeping. My house was always in chaos. We had a really cool house designed by an architect, built into the side of a mountain. It had floor-to-ceiling windows. It could be very creepy being in the living room late at night with all the windows. Some nights, I'd wake and smell bacon and eggs at like 3 a.m. I would hear noises in the kitchen. So, I would go to the kitchen. There was a built breakfast nook. Sitting at that nook was my mother fully dressed. Dress, stockings, full makeup, hair done, like she was going out. There was a full breakfast. Eggs, bacon, hash browns, and grapefruit. 2 plates were set opposite each other. There sat my mom engaged in full conversation. There was just one problem. There was no one sitting on the opposite side of my mother. She talked and laughed with the imaginary person and smoked cigarettes. This went on for hours. I spent the night at my friend's house, and being awake, I went to look in the kitchen. No mom talking to her imaginary friend. When I got home, I asked my dad about it, and he told me that it had started after the death of my brother. I lost an older sister to pneumonia and my younger brother of SIDS. I guess my mom was already struggling with mental health issues, and she just cracked right down the center. It was a scary childhood. Mental health is a terrible scourge. I sometimes think that it can be worse than cancer. My mother had both the physical and the mental issues, but the mental issues were worse. She's at peace now with my brother and my sister. Ask Reddit. When I was around 16, my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of our time fondly remembering things that we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. At some point, I decided to go into the downstairs closet with a flashlight and read. Sometimes I used to do this when I was younger to get some peace and quiet. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes underneath the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot-high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. After an hour in, I I shift a little to get comfortable, and I hear a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice saying, "You always make me happy." I flipped my shit, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke down the door getting out. After hyperventilating and explaining to my family why there was no color left in my face, I went back to see what it was. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that happened to lean on it just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again, nothing. This poor bear I hadn't played with since I was a toddler used the last of its power, used its dying breath to tell me I made it happy. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me piss myself. Ask Reddit. I believe I was visited by an angel some years ago. I was out with my college class, collecting water samples in the local river for viewing. Within 2 minutes of getting the water, I fell and got soaked in temperatures of 25 degrees. The water was slightly icy. I brushed it off, then fell again, and then a third time. I gave up, walking back to the group to mix some chemicals or whatever. After an hour, the teacher noticed how soaked I was and offered to let me leave early with another group to go back to campus, a quarter mile away. And that was via car, so I could get in a warm shower. I refused, and a few minutes later, I was asked to refill a pitcher in the river. The bank was muddy, and I fell in, getting even more soaked, and now I had mud all over me because I took my waders off. I walked back at once, threw my hands in the air, and got in the car. I heard sirens in the shower. When I got back, I was told that someone was hit on the road that we were working by. Later, I learned a group mate of mine was hit and killed by a car. I don't blame the guy. He was on the way to the hospital for his wife who had cancer and was just driving a tiny bit fast. The person who was hit, Bird, was walking slightly ahead of the group. If the others had been walking at his pace, everyone and the teacher would have been hit. If I had been walking with the group, I would have likely been walking alongside Bird. He and I walk at the same pace. We were next to each other on the way to the river. We would have likely talked together on the way back. I truly believe that someone up there wanted me to live. I'm normally clumsy, yes, but not like this. I kept tripping over literal air and went underwater when I shouldn't have. I'm good at keeping my head up when I fall. I just question why me and why Bird couldn't have been saved as well. Ask Reddit. Last year, I once woke up thinking, he's here. Convinced there was someone standing next to my bed. I was so scared and didn't dare to open my eyes for what seemed like an hour. When I was around 13, there was a moment I saw an elderly couple outside my window while I was undressing. I gave them the finger thinking that they were pervs, but the next moment, they were gone. It was also not the right height for people to stand at. They must have been 2.5 meters tall for them to be at that place. My friend and I tried making animals with light and shadow hands. Suddenly there was this tiny man. I told my friend, "Wow, you're amazing. How are you doing that?" When she answered, "Oh my God, I didn't. I thought that was you." The thing started running towards us. We both hid underneath the blankets. My dad opened the door, so no idea what that would have happened. And last but not least, we had a terrible car accident once where my dad crushed in another car and we couldn't have fallen down a ravine, but luckily we didn't. Also, from 2 families, there were only some light injuries, although both cars were totally wrecked. Years later, my dad told me that he believes he has a guardian angel because on that day, the police and himself found something like a handprint trying to keep the car from falling down there. Doppelganger. I had my first encounter with a doppelganger 2 weeks ago. I convinced myself that it was just in my head. Must have been a waking dream of sorts. Me and my boyfriend went out. I myself had only 2 beers over 5.5 hours that we were out, so I'm not even buzzed. I was in my kitchen waiting for my dog to finish his business so I can lock up and go to bed when I see movement to my right. To put this in context, my kitchen is a rectangle with my family room on my left, and my living room would be behind me, and my master bedroom off to that to the right. And to the right of my kitchen is a laundry room, open floor plan. Okay, back to the moment on my right. I turned, confused because I thought my boyfriend had went into the bedroom to start getting things ready for bed, when I see him in the doorway to the laundry room smiling at me. Then he did a 180 very dramatically, took a step forward, and proceeded to comically walk behind the wall in the laundry room. Monty Python's Flying Circus Ministry of Silly Walks bit is the closest thing that I can have to describe how he walked away. Me, confused, followed asking him what he was smoking. There was no one there. There's no way out of the laundry room. One way in, one way out. Then it came back this morning, and this time my dog reacted. It showed up again in my bedroom doorway, smiling, and gestured for me to follow. I was 100% sure my boyfriend was outside getting our vehicle started for work. My dog freaked out and got between it and myself, and he was pissed. And when I looked down at him and tried to grab him because, shit, I don't know what the hell it is, but I don't want my dog to get hurt, it was gone. I looked in my bedroom, my closet, and my attached bathroom. Nothing. There's no other way out that I could have walked through. It'd have to go through me to get through, just to get away at all. What did I see? Someone help me figure this out. Situation number 1. I was at my grandma's house in the upstairs bedroom. It's a 4-bedroom old house on the country, and I'm laying in bed watching Netflix on my phone on a nightstand. There's a door to my grandma's bedroom that's catty-corner to the open door in the room that I'm sleeping in. So I'm laying there watching Forensic Files, and so my view is kind of distorted from the light on the screen, but I see a black figure walk up and grab the doorknob of the door to the other bedroom. And it just stands there. I'm thinking it's my grandma who's downstairs. She's kind of hard of hearing, so I say "Grandma" a few times, louder and louder until the hair stands up on the back of my neck, and I lean up in bed and say "Grandma" really loud. At this point, whatever it is knows I'm looking at it and replies to me, "Oh, you can see me?" and turns around and walks away, bro. I didn't know what to do. I sat there for a minute and then got up and looked through all the other bedrooms, and nobody was up there. I go downstairs and my grandma's sitting there watching Jeopardy like usual. I asked her if she went upstairs. She said no. Has no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not schizophrenic that I know of, and I was completely sober. Freaked the out of me. Situation number 2. Fast forward 6 months, and it's New Year's. Long story short, I'm laying in the other bedroom. That was catty-corner to the one that I was in the first time in that story. And out of sleep and crazy hungover. I hear a woman mumbling down the hallway by the bathroom. Hallway and the bathroom in the same big bedroom. I don't think anything of it. Maybe somebody stopped over and I was hearing them downstairs. There is a balcony in the bedroom that I'm at and a patio out front on the bottom level. I laid there for a little while listening to it, but I couldn't make any words out. So I go downstairs and ask my mom and my grandma, who are both sitting downstairs on each other end of the house in the living room watching TV, if there's anybody there. My mom said no. I told her I heard some lady upstairs mumbling. She just said no one was there. So I went back upstairs and tried to get some sleep. As soon as I'm barely asleep, I'm laying on my right side and I hear a scream from a girl less than 3 inches from my left ear. I was so scared I jumped up and ran into the door, then opened it and ran out. Fast forward again to later that night, and my mom's spending the night at my apartment. She doesn't live in town, she was visiting. My mom said that she hears the lady too some mornings mumbling down the hallway, but she can never make out what it's saying. She just didn't want to say anything in front of my grandmother to freak her out. My grandma doesn't believe in ghosts. What the fuck, bro? I refuse to sleep over there anymore. Hell no. Any ideas on what I heard or saw? The house was built by my grandfather and his first wife who lived there. They had a young daughter who died of some blood disease. I'm not sure what happened or if it's curable. But I get some super weird, anxious vibes from that house. I bought an audio recorder and set it up there 3 days. I went through all the audio recordings on my girlfriend's laptop. I can't hear anything except for some interference every now and then. But it might just be the audio recorder. Large dog creature in Florida. Let me say first and foremost, I'm a man of logic and explanation. I never believed in ghosts or other cryptic beings really in my life, but something happened the other night that really made me feel weird. So I live somewhere in between country and town here in Florida, and I see an abundance of wildlife. Foxes, coyotes, raccoons, all very normal to see. Since there's a pretty large fox population around here and most people having chickens, everyone has large dogs, including me. I have a 70-pound boy and a 60-pound girl pit bull. They're fearless. They know this is their property and they protect it as such, alerting me if they hear something. And if they do, I open the door and they run out to chase whatever it is. The other night, I woke up randomly, and it was disturbingly quiet outside, like not a single cricket, and my dogs were not on the bed like they usually are. All of a sudden, a howl like I've never heard went off like a siren that sent a chill running down my spine, like a deep yell almost, but definitely from an animal. I turned the lights on in my house to see my pit bulls at the back of their crate shaking. Never seen that look on my dog's face like that before. Purely terrified. So I turned all the lights back off, grabbed a flashlight, and looked out my back window. What I saw about 200 yards off by the tree line near the back of my property was a dog thing. I vaguely saw it, but it was very similar to a hyena in build, with a large amount of fur on its neck, like a mane. Almost skinny back legs. Its head looked very wolf-like, with erect ears and a large skull. It was fucking huge. It was so black it was hard to make out distinct characteristics, but its presence scared basically any living thing that was around, it seemed, that night. The next morning I went to the spot I saw the animal, but saw no tracks or hair or anything. But I know what I saw. I never saw anything like it before. Has anyone in Florida seen anything like this? We've been having a lot of dead dogs in the area. Dogs that are large and are being killed by something. Other people think it's coyotes or a feral dog, but I think it's that thing I saw. Just seeing my dog so terrified really scared me. Ask Reddit. In my senior year of high school, I was stuck in writing class with all grades for a semester. I was sat next to a group of rather loud freshmen, much to my dismay, and despite trying to remain as recluse as possible, one of the freshman girls would occasionally try and chat me up. Because of my grumpy nature, she began calling me Grandpa affectionately, and only she and the group would bother to talk to me. We definitely weren't friends. She was just too loud and bubbly for me. But even as the semester ended, we changed classes, we passed each other every morning on our way to first period, and she would always call out, "Hey, Grandpa," as she passed me with her group of friends that she walked with every day. In late March, it began to buzz around the school that a freshman had committed suicide. It was said to the upperclassmen, but we never dwelled on it, because beyond hearing about the suicide prevention assembly freshmen were required to attend, it never affected us. In mid-April, I was running late to my first period, and this particular day stuck out to me, because I had actually done my first period homework, which I never did. And if you showed up late, any work turned in wasn't credited. As I was running down the hall, I saw the freshman girl alone and leaning against the wall. She looked at me and said, "Hey, Grandpa," in a very sad voice. I quickly said hi and ran off to class without another thought. Fast forward to my last band concert of the year, and the final song was sung by the choir, in dedication for the fallen freshman who had just been in the group. I glanced down at the program to see what song they were singing, and for the first time ever, I saw the freshman's name. It was the girl. I was immediately frozen stiff, much to my bandmates' confusion, and asked if it was a misprint. Nope, it was her name. I looked up her death date in the obituary, and it was March, but I'd seen her in April, alone, and so sad looking. I cried on my walk home after the concert, and still to this day, I have no homework that I did. This says I have 2 homework I did that was never credited in April because I ran late. Ask Reddit. Damn, 8 comments. Hopefully this gets attention. My mom told me about a story. I don't remember, as I was too young. She was bathing me in a trailer home that she had back then, and then I asked her, "Mommy, who's that man behind you?" And no one was there. She also told me there was a rocking chair that rocked by itself. Another time I was staying the night at my cousin's and grandparents' place, and I woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like multiple people talking in the next room. I don't think it was too weird until I asked my cousin about it years later, and he said that he had woke up to that too that night and didn't recognize the voices. I heard a man talking one night about his regrets and stuff like that when my mom and my dad were both asleep next to me. It was a sort of a wake-up, hear weird things, think nothing of it, then go back to sleep type thing. I was very young. It was at a new apartment, first night there. Those apartments are right next to the cemetery. I had the same nightmare the whole time I lived there. I still remember it very clearly. My buddy and I were up to no good one summer. For some reason, I really wanted to rob a house. I was a bad kid. Anyway, after we broke a window or got some other hood rat shit, we went and run over back to his house. On the way there is a big mansion, about 2 or 3 acres of land, in a weird spot, really. It was behind a convenience store in a residential area in one of the bad parts of town. Anyway, We were running to his house, and we were passing this mansion in a field. We saw what looked like a woman in a long white dress keeping pace with us, but not in a running pose, and we couldn't see her feet. She was floating at the speed that we were running. We got back to his house, and I asked if he saw it. He said yes, and that was that. Never saw it again. What was a time you truly couldn't explain something, whether it was paranormal or not? For me, it happened when I was probably 14, so probably back in 2009-ish. I was sleeping over at my cousin's house, where I think we honestly haunted his house from all using a Ouija board. We were laying on their couches in their living room trying to fall asleep around 2 or 3 a.m. It was dead silent other than a fan running to cool the house down since it was summertime. And out of nowhere, we all hear the loudest sound we've ever heard before. It sounded like the entire universe was collapsing into itself right in his living room, and only lasted for a second or two. We instantly sat up and asked each other if all three of us heard that noise. And we did. We were asking each other what it could have been when his dad comes running down the stairs into the living room and asks us what it was. Us having no idea, we just said we don't know, it just woke us all up. His dad didn't believe us, and we started semi-laughing because it scared us so badly. He then accuses us some more. Then we laugh at him because none of us genuinely did it. He was starting to sound like a crazy person. Eventually, he went back upstairs to go to bed, and we eventually fell asleep too. To this day, me and my cousins still have no idea what it could have been. My only theory was that the house was settling on its foundation or something, even though it was only built in the mid-90s. Ouija board I buried over 16 years ago. When I was a young teen, I stole a Ouija board from Spencer's and played around with it a couple times with a couple of friends. I ended up putting it in the bottom drawer of my dresser to hide it from my parents. At some point, I'd start glancing over there while trying to sleep, feeling uncomfortable, like there was some kind of presence in the drawer. I didn't really know what to do, so I took it out and just buried it by a big pine tree. I looked for it for several years later, but couldn't find it because the ivy was so overgrown. My parents have been divorced for quite a while now, and I don't live at that house anymore. I haven't talked to my dad in about 9 years, but my mom has said that he thinks his house is haunted, complaining about keys and other things disappearing or getting moved somewhere else. Not to mention a bunch of other bad or strange things that went on there. But that would really take a long time to talk about. Neither of my parents knew about the Ouija board, and they're both religious. I have an occasional strange dream about the pool back there always being absolutely filthy and scary creatures living in it. I suffer from depression and anxiety too. I wish I could go and find it and deal with it somehow, but the situation's complicated. Ask Reddit. When I was 16, my sister spent her last few days in the hospital. I remember her close friend came to pick me up from school to see my sister. At this time, I didn't know how serious my sister's condition was. But before we went to the hospital, we swung by my house so I could get some things to take. I felt uneasy, and my instinct told me something was wrong, so I just started to cry. Of course, I knew my eyes would dry out since I wore contact lenses, so I took my eye drops with me. A few days passed, it happened. My family stayed at the hospital to take care of everything, and another family friend took me home. And this time, the last person to be at my home was me. That was the day I grabbed my eye drops. On the way home, despite being the saddest I'd ever been in my life, I remember my eyes becoming painfully dry due to the crying. Then I remembered I left my eye drops on her bedside table. I remember very specifically. When I got home, the same bottle of eye drops, and I only had one bottle, was on my desk in my bedroom. This was so shocking to me, but somehow comforting, because it gave me a sense of possibility. Why do purification rituals and smudging often make paranormal activity worse? I've never had any first-hand experience with something I can blatantly account to being paranormal, but like everyone else, I've had weird experiences that certainly gave me the chills. I've been watching a lot of paranormal activity videos on YouTube for years now, and used to read a lot of stories, and on other forums about people's experiences with hauntings. I've noticed that usually whenever people try to get rid of a ghost or try to treat, quote-unquote, their haunting, they'll perform some sort of purification ritual with incense or burning some herbs. Maybe they'll use holy water or something, or often they attempt a smudging or burning of sage, and they instead seem to end up provoking the entities and ultimately make their hauntings even worse or become violent. Why do you believe this is? Could it be that they're performing rituals incorrectly? I don't know the right quote-unquote way to smudge a house, but I've heard that there is a correct way to do it. Personally, I think it's probably because they're focusing all their attention on the entities that are causing the haunting, and they're feeding off of the energy and the fear. I've always heard that the best thing to do when paranormal activity begins is to ignore it and pay it no mind, or rather, that one of the worst things you can do is start asking it to do things, talk to it, try to contact it, or show fear and vulnerability. I think I have an extra roommate in my house. I think my house has some sort of entity or energy co-inhabiting with my roommate and I. I recently moved into a 2-story, 3-bed duplex, 4 units in the whole building. The building is old, quiet, and unnerving. I moved in 1 month to the day and have sensed, seen, and felt some things that I can't explain. The first week of living alone, I had 2 jobs, and I was working from 10:30 a.m. until about midnight every night. But thankfully, I got out of my night job. It was after I had more time in the house that I began experiencing these things. On a Tuesday morning, I was doing my telehealth therapy on my PC, when all of a sudden I heard a loud thud from my kitchen. I turned my head and my therapist acknowledged what I heard. She heard it too. She seemed really freaked out because she said a bright flash of light went over my head as soon as the bang occurred. I went into the kitchen to find my fridge open and bananas on the floor. I was pretty freaked out but tried to rationalize it to the best of my abilities, but I'm still failing to do so. I woke up the next day hoping everything was just a coincidence. But before I took a shower, I noticed 2 scratch marks and 2 fainter ones next to each scratch. I know the picture quality is bad, but I was late to work and I had to capture some evidence. There have been frequent scatters of footsteps in the creepy basement at late hours, and knocks of 3 in succession, on doors. I watched too many horror movies about this, and now it's finally my turn. Mystic Mayhem, My Priest Uncle and the Malevolent Witchcraft Box. My uncle is a priest, and something truly unexplainable happened to him. Beside the temple, there's a huge old ficus, big old ficus tree that attracts both God worshippers and practitioners of black magic and witchcraft. In our village, some witches perform their rituals in the early morning to avoid being seen. One day, as my uncle was cleaning and purifying the temple surroundings with holy water, he accidentally picked an empty box of incense sticks, mistaking it for a full one. It was near the ficus tree outside the temple. Unaware of its significance, he brought it inside the temple while performing his prayers and priestly duties. However, the moment he crossed the temple boundary on his way out, something inexplicable occurred. He was suddenly thrown to the ground and viciously attacked by an invisible entity. Although he couldn't see anyone, his body bore long nail scratches, and he seemed to have been punched under his eyes, leaving pigmented purplish-bluish marks. The injuries were severe, as if the entity showed no mercy. In his distress, my uncle managed to call for help when he spotted a villager passing by. The villager was shocked to see the terrible state my uncle was in. I eavesdropped my parents' conversation since they hide these things. So what I heard after was that our family's senior priest was summoned to examine him, and he revealed the shocking truth. It turned out that my uncle had unknowingly touched a piece of an object used in witchcraft, possessing powerful black evil energies. When he brought that box inside the temple, the evil entity within the object was in distress and became enraged. As soon as my uncle left the temple, the malevolent force attacked him with full force. This incident has left us all shaken, as it serves as a stark reminder of the unseen and powerful forces that can be present around us. My uncle is now recovering, but the experience has left us all deeply perplexed and cautious about the mysterious world beyond our comprehension. Death news and paranormal encounters. Death Newser. Back in 2020, when COVID was everywhere, my uncle got the virus and his condition was pretty bad. One day before his death, really weird things happened. Morning, as soon as I woke up, I went to open the balcony door. There's a black butterfly, and it entered, and the small creature died in front of me. That small, petite creature stopped flying and fell down. That was really odd. I felt bad. Then I blew her outside. After a while, a black bird came from our kitchen window, took a round of the kitchen, and went outside. Now it got really weird. Black butterfly, black bird. Whole day went as usual. Around 3 a.m., I slightly woke up. I don't remember the exact time, but I hear a mixed voice of many people in unison, men and women's voices together, saying to me something like, "Take care of your brother is in danger." At that moment, I was paralyzed. I don't have sleep paralysis, and I'm aware of what it is. And I couldn't open my eyes nor move. I was screaming, "Mom, Mom!" but nothing came out. I was screaming inside. I could hear my scream inside my chest. It came out, "Mom!" Finally, the third time. She came running to my room and asked what happened, and I proceeded to tell her. But I was worried about my brother. I kept checking on him if he was all right. Then the next morning, we got the news of my uncle passing away. The unknown voice from the unknown source just warned me. Am I a psychic? What was that? After a few days, his soul visited us. I was smelling like something burning and felt something in front of me, but I can't see. The next morning, my mom confirmed and told me that she felt as someone was watching her, but she told me not to worry. It It must be his soul. Night visitor. We just shifted to our new house, 2019. We had things to arrange and beds to make. We decided for now that we'll sleep on the floor, and that day, all of us woke up around 3 a.m. to drink water. My neighbor was watching a movie at a loud volume so I could hear it, and I was seriously annoyed. I wasn't able to drift back to sleep after flipping side by side for a while. I felt something strange, like someone staring at me. Someone sitting right beside me, like right now, present tense to imagine. My eyes are closed, but I could feel the strong gaze of 2 pairs on me. And after a while, I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like they have long hair. My eyes are closed, but I feel it. It's too close to my face. Now I'm sweating horribly. I'm fighting for my life. I opened my eyes, saw nothing but darkness. I again gulp a glass of water and try to sleep, but I can't close my eyes and drift to dreamland. Now my body's getting colder and colder, cold as ice, cold sweat running down, and my body's trembling so bad I can't stop it. I was shaking so bad, I was anxious. I had very weird feelings in my chest. I was on the verge to cry. Taking deep breaths, but I can't no more. I woke my parents up and they were mad. Yeah, I asked my mom to come over to my side and sleep beside me. She scolded me, but she eventually came. I hugged her. She flinched. She held my hand and said, "Oh my God, you're cold as ice." She rubbed my hands and feet. Now my father was wide awake too. He turned the lights on and tried to calm me down. After a few minutes, as I was going to sleep, I noticed that the front door was open. We were sleeping in the living room. It was freaking open. I remember before sleeping that my dad had locked it. Now I'm in full fear, terrified. I told my dad, pointing my finger toward the door. My dad looked and lied. Excuse. That he went outside to walk a bit. Then he put me back to sleep. But I was awake. How could I sleep? Then my father speaks to my mother, assuming I'm asleep, stating that he'd heard someone knocking on the door. But when he checked, no one was outside. He said that he thought it was a soul, so he locked the door. I don't know how it was open. We need to see if the lock still works, or to get a new one from the priest. That's chilling. I know how to spend that night. It seemed too long, and I was just hoping to open my eyes in the morning. By the way, the locket from the priest was for my protection. And yeah, it was a bit broken. When I was 5 or something, our family priest strictly told my parents to not let me take it off. I was maybe affected by negative energy. Whenever I asked my parents, they never told me anything. But now I'm safe from whatever it was. The false call. My mom called in for dinner. I was in my study room. As I turned the lights off, I heard mixed voices in unison saying my name, reciting my name once. But I didn't look back and had a small run to the kitchen. Did you ever experience something like that, ever? Question about what I can only describe as a demon. So years ago, me and my girlfriend at the time took a picture while laying in bed, with my niece between us and the poster behind us on the wall. We clearly caught what I can only describe as a demon staring straight down at my niece. It was clear as day, no mistaking it. It was looking through the light reflecting off the poster, like it was a window or something. Thinking we got a weird angle, clearly in denial, we recorded a video of us probably 15 to 20 seconds long to see if we still saw it. Mind you, my niece was asleep between us having nightmares for the last hour or so we kept waking her up. Anyways, in the video, right when it starts, you can see it still staring down at her, eyes bulging, looking down. About 5 seconds in, a white orb flies from behind my right shoulder toward the opposite corner of the room. As soon as it gets halfway across the bed, the thing in the poster looks up as its eyes follow the orb of light. Then the video ends. We immediately grabbed my niece, ran into the living room, and turned on all the lights, starting to read a Bible till the sun came up. This all happened at a family friend's house, so as soon as we were able to get a ride to get out of there, we did, and we never went back. I still have the phone, but it's broken. I don't know how to get any of the videos off of it without being able to turn on USB mode. The thing in the poster I looked at that night looked like the king from the Game of Thrones, except with scales all over its face. And instead of a blue color, it was like a dark blood. So dark it was almost pitch black or burnt like dark red tint to the scales. And the creepiest eyes I've ever seen. The girlfriend who was with me at the time is now my wife. We often have to ask one another what really happened because who wants to believe something like that even exists? So now, to the question. Does anyone have any ideas of what it was that we encountered? Based on its description and the facts, that it was causing my niece nightmares, and looking through the light bouncing off the poster, what did we see? My great-grandmother accurately predicted the destruction of her family home and saved her mother's life. My grandmother told me this story about her mother. She's not at all spiritual and doesn't have any other stories like this, so it's always stood out to me. It's a little long, so please bear with me. When my great-grandmother was a child, she had frequent prophetic dreams. Usually it would be something small like receiving a letter in the mail or having a specific conversation with a friend. And this friend would be in her dream, and within a few days the event would actually occur. At the time she lived with her mother, who used a wheelchair, and her grandmother. I believe that she also had siblings, but they aren't relevant to the story. Her grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmother, was supposedly a psychic medium herself. Admittingly, I have some doubts about this claim. I have to assume that her grandma didn't work as a medium professionally due to the time period, but I don't doubt that she had psychic abilities. Anyway, her grandma was very interested in these dreams and always took them seriously. One night she had a dream that was different than the rest. She dreamed that there was a terrible house fire and that they were unable to get her mother out of the home in time, due to difficulties with her wheelchair. She woke up in the middle of the night crying inconsolably. She told her grandmother about the dream, and she immediately started waking up the rest of the family, telling them to grab as much stuff as they could take with them. They hopped in the car and went to stay with a family friend for the night. The next day, they come back to check on the house, and it's just ashes, completely burned to the ground. I can't remember if they ever found the cause of the fire. As far as I know, this is the only big incident that she ever predicted. But I wonder what else went on in that family. Unfortunately, my great-grandmother passed away when I was young, so I never got the chance to ask her about this story. I've also had a few dreams like this myself. Nothing as extreme as a house fire, but still interesting. And I wish I could talk to her about them. Ask Reddit. When I was young, my family moved into, quote-unquote, the most haunted house on an Indian reservation in 2001. The whole town knew of it, and I grew up known as the kid who lives in the haunted house. We're a white family, and the house was abandoned for years before we moved in. It was apparently built on an Indian burial ground. The tribe overheard that someone bought the house and insisted on cleansing it before we moved in. The tribe's leaders and shaman showed up and started to walk into the house and just stopped. They would not enter the house. We were forced to do the ritual in the front yard. They didn't feel it was safe. We had the occasionally spooky noises, but it was an old rickety house, so we didn't think twice about it. We also always had dogs and cats to blame the unexplained noises on. Years went by, and we continued to ignore what most people would consider to be creepy or haunted, up until about a year ago, that is. The spirits must have had just enough and wanted to be heard finally. A friend of mine was down the road at a mutual friend's house and was too drunk to drive all the way home. We lived pretty far out in the country. He called me, and I insisted he sleep on my couch for the night. He showed up around 2 a.m. The whole house was asleep except for me and him. I got him some water and blankets, set him up for a nice sleeping spot on the couch, and we both went to bed. We woke up early the next morning, and he was getting ready to leave and grabbed his 400 pair of Jordan high-top retros. He started to put them on and quickly stopped, realizing there was something inside of his left shoe. He reached in and pulled out a small chunk of dog shit and a crumpled up tissue. Everyone was still asleep. No one woke up throughout the night. There were only 3 suspects: my mom, my dad, or my brother, none of which would be rude enough to do such a thing. My dogs never had a problem going to the bathroom in the house, let alone aiming perfectly into a shoe. To this day, we still don't know how it got there. The tissue made him believe someone was pulling a prank on him, but I swore on my first child that none of my family members would ever think to do something like that. We had no choice but to blame the spirits. 17 years I lived in that house, and that was the most unexplained thing that's ever happened. My friend is still convinced the house is haunted and refuses to spend the night anymore. I try to joke about it every now and then, and he gets very uneasy at the thought of it. It still bugs me that we'll never know how it happened. But at least I know my ghosts have a good sense of humor. Ask Reddit. My in-laws' former house seemed to have some odd stuff going on in it. My wife and I sold our house, and we were going to buy a house that my in-laws were living in at the time. They had another house that they were fixing up, so my wife, myself, and my oldest daughter moved into the house with my in-laws. My oldest had to share a room with me and my wife, while we lived there due to my in-laws having the other bedrooms piled with junk. That would be loved once the other house was full. So, she gets up to go to school one morning. My wife has already left for work. I hear my daughter say, "Scoot over, Daddy. I'm getting in your bed. I feel bad." I slightly open my eyes to see her PJs and scoot over. I trust my kid to know when she's too sick for school, and she gets in the bed. I don't go back to sleep, but I roll over to check on her, and no one's there. I sit up to look around. No kid. I text her and ask where she went. She says, school? To which I ask when. She says, I left a while ago, my normal time. I was freaked out. A few weeks later, my wife says that she got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Said when she opened the door, there was a man in the middle of the bathroom that looked giant, and he was on fire. She was not fazed by this, as she sees stuff her entire life, but she wanted me to be aware. No big deal, right? Well, it wasn't until my daughter is in the office room with me a few days later and look into the hall toward the same bathroom and says, "Do you see the big red man over there?" I didn't see it, but that freaked me out. had a dream my nanny went to heaven. When I woke up, I was told she passed. My nanny, aka my grandmother, passed away when I was 9. Her and I were extremely close. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and was terminal. At 9, I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. Now my aunt, my nanny's daughter, passed away when she was 18. I never seen any good quality photos of her, so I never really had a good image of her face. All I know was my nanny would say her favorite color was black. I put this part in so you could understand what I'm going to be saying next. I usually slept at my nanny's house and went to school in the morning. This was a weekend, and for some reason I slept home that night. When I woke up that morning, I remember having this vivid dream. I dreamt that my nanny was floating on a cloud going up to heaven. She was so happy and excited. I then remember looking up in the dream and seeing this woman on a cloud with her arms raised, and she was wearing black. I wasn't creeped out during the dream because my nanny looked so happy. The woman's face was blurred out, and I remember trying so hard to see her face. I woke up with tears coming down mine, but I just brushed it off and headed downstairs. When I was coming down the stairs, my whole family was in the living room. My mom was crying. I asked her why she was so upset. She unfortunately told me that my nanny passed away. I was frozen in place. I was devastated. I just lost my best friend. But I felt a sense of peace because I knew she was with her daughter again. I waited a few days before I told anybody about the dream, in fear that I would upset them. I still remember this vivid dream and the peace that comes with it. I grew up Catholic and was currently enrolled in a Catholic school, so I did believe in God and all that stuff. The only terrifying thought is that, yeah, I believe in heaven, but if there is a heaven, there must be a hell. Why aren't ghosts naked? If objects don't have quote-unquote souls or whatever, why do ghosts, when visible, wear clothing? This has always bothered me. I'm a non-believer, but I do entertain myself thinking about the logic behind the existence of ghosts. So I don't understand how ghosts appear with clothing when clothes cannot have souls. There won't be a ghost of a toilet, a door, a car. Maybe we can agree that sometimes the soul of one or multiple people can turn inanimate objects into ghost versions of them, like the ghost ships and stuff. But how does that work? They wear the thing that they died with. If a person used to wear glasses, does the ghost has its own eye problems as well? A person with Tourette's also has Tourette's as a ghost? At least this will indicate the soul of a person evolves at the same time the person grows. But what about a baby ghost or non-born kids? I've seen cases about people believing in their unborn child haunting another baby of the said person. How does the ghost look like? And more importantly, how does it think? Do we unlock full consciousness, logic, and intelligence as ghosts? Does a retarded person, sorry, can't come up with another word, not being rude or trying to offend anybody, maintain their cognitive problems as a ghost? Because that just sounds like mental torture. Also, if we know that a person's soul evolves and looks like the said person, what about people with skin issues and missing limbs? The ghosts look like that as well? And if not, what and when does the soul decide to look like this and not look like that?